There are probably several reasons for the popularity of Vivian Maier. One, of course, is the quality of her photography. Another is her story, the quirky and very private nanny who took tens of thousands of pictures that she never showed, as far as we know, to anyone. But this very limited biography has only made people more intrigued to find out more about her personal story and about the development of her talent for capturing life on the streets. Several people have been digging into Maier's personal and artistic past, including a photographer who says she has found a key event in Maier's transformation to serious photographer. In part 3 of our series, here's Jay Shefsky with a look at what they're finding.
As Vivian Maier's photos began to appear, so did a precious few biographical details. We learned that she was born in New York in 1926. Her mother was French, her father Austro-Hungarian. She spent time in both New York and France as a child, and in 1951, at age 25, she settled in New York. 5 years later, she came to Chicago, where she spent the rest of her life working as a live-in nanny and shooting roughly 1 roll of film every day. The first to try to piece together Vivian's past was John Maloof, who owns most of her photo archive, along with personal possessions and documents that offer clues to her story. Now, John Maloof is working on a documentary.
I mean, I've found over 70 people that know her, and I've interviewed almost 30 of them.
John even traveled to France to interview people who knew her as a young woman. He expects his film to be released in 2013. Until then, he's reluctant to share very much of what he's found, but he's happy to tease us.
I found things that show she may have even had the intention to show her work, and maybe had taken jobs as a photographer.
So this is the front cover and the back cover.
Michael Williams and Richard Cahan say that the best way to learn about Vivian Maier is to look at her photos. They're working on a book called Vivian Maier, Out of the Shadows.
Her photo life is really a photo diary of her life, so it's filled with every moment from her life and lined up end to end. We have a record of what she found funny, what she found disgusting, what she found awesome.
The book is based on the 18,000 negatives in the collection of Jeff Goldstein, who owns part of Vivian Maier's archive. The book follows Vivian on 9 photographic journeys, from the Chicago stockyards to the Maxwell Street Market to France. And they interviewed Inger Raymond, who was cared for by Vivian as a child from 1966 to 1972.
Inger has a vivid memory of exactly those years, and Vivian was really out to teach Inger a lot about life. She taught Inger how to sew, how to cook, how to hitchhike.
She talked about how bold Vivian was, that she wasn't a wallflower, that she wasn't kind of lurking in the darkness, that she would go right up to people. She wasn't afraid to take their pictures.
Jim Dempsey knew Vivian Maier personally. Today he owns a Chicago gallery, but he got to know Vivian pretty well when he worked at the Art Institute of Chicago's Film Center.
Vivian probably came in to the theater maybe 2 or 3 times a month for about 10 years, and we became great friends. She seemed to really like talking to me.
But Jim says Vivian rarely talked about herself.
We talked about films. She would come to see German noir films and some of the classic Fellini and Antonioni films.
This was during the 1990s mostly, when Vivian was in her 60s and 70s. Jim says she never talked about photography, but she often had an old camera around her neck.
She would wear that sort of floppy hat. She really looked like central casting of slightly on the edge of woman. And I even made jokes to some of my staff. I said, there's probably not even film in that damn vintage camera she's carrying around her neck.
So here's her shadow. She's on Liberty Island. She's facing Ellis Island in the distance.
Another way to learn about Vivian Maier is to do your own detective work.
Right. And in the bag is a Time magazine that I was able to locate as being dated December 22nd, 1952.
Pamela Banos doesn't own any Vivian Maier photos, and she's never met her. She's a photographer, and she teaches at Northwestern University.
She's up and down 3rd Avenue.
But in the last couple months, she has identified the precise location of dozens of Vivian Maier's photos and pinpointed them on a map of New York. And she has tracked down the census records and ship manifests for Vivian and her family beginning in 1901. When Vivian's grandmother came to this country and worked, like Vivian and like Vivian's mother, as a domestic servant. Pamela Banos is an artist who specializes in using photos and other documents to dig deep into a story. Most recently, she explored the long-forgotten city cemetery in Chicago's Lincoln Park. Her Vivian Maier digging was sparked when I called her for what I thought was going to be a quick soundbite about Vivian's photos.
I mean, the call came from the blue, right? And all of a sudden, I'm like, I don't know if I want to be on TV. If I'm going to be on TV, I better understand what I'm talking about so I don't look like I don't know what I'm talking about. So I got more and more into it. Next thing I knew, I'm learning things that it appears like no one knew or that hadn't been considered.
Within a few weeks, she had downloaded every Vivian Maier photo she could find on the internet. She put them in chronological order, and then she figured out the locations.
And then behind there, it says York Hotel.
But this isn't just an exercise. Banos says that as a photographer and as a woman, she is particularly well suited to get inside Vivian Maier's head.
I know what it's like to take pictures for my own self, to not show them to anyone, to be nervous to show them to anyone.
What Banos really wants is to figure out Vivian's development as a photographer.
I'm really interested in this time period from 51 to 53. That's the beginning of her. I'm interested in how she became Vivian Maier.
This period is critical because Vivian Maier switches from this old box camera to this sophisticated professional quality Rolleiflex.
This is the Rolleiflex that she apparently acquired sometime in 1952, because then in 1953, January forward, this is the camera that she's using. We see it in all of her self-portraits.
Banos wasn't the first to see that 1952 was an important turning point. But she says she's found an event in Vivian's life that may have inspired the transformation. Some have suggested that Vivian Maier was influenced by Lisette Model, an important street photographer who was teaching in Lower Manhattan in the 1950s. But if Vivian was learning from Model in Greenwich Village, why can't Banos find any photos that were shot below 34th Street? What she has found is another source of inspiration.
Harry Callahan, Cartier-Bresson again, Walker Evans.
The Museum of Modern Art website lists every exhibition in its history, and it turns out that Vivian could hardly have chosen a better time to come to New York. The Museum of Modern Art had several shows in 1951 of important cutting-edge photography. But did she go to those exhibitions? Was she even aware of them?
So she arrives in 1951 in the springtime, and in December, a show goes up at the Museum of Modern Art called Five French Photographers. We're talking about Brassai, we're talking about Henri Cartier-Bresson, we're talking about Robert Doisneau, we're talking about Isis, and we're talking about Willie Ronis. She's in New York at this time.
It's a nice coincidence, but we don't know that she went to this exhibition.
But Banos says that she has the evidence, this Vivian Maier photo of Salvador Dali.
There's this photograph of Salvador Dali, and he's in front of the Museum of Modern Art.
Actually, there are two photos, clearly taken on the same day. In one, he's in front of the museum, and the other one offers the essential clue, in Vivian's own handwriting.
She dates this photograph. On the back of this original photograph, in her handwriting, it says, in French, January 24th. When this photograph was made, the show called Five French Photographers was up at the Museum of Modern Art. She's taking this picture with her ancient little box camera. Within a year, she's taking pictures with the Rolleiflex, which is the same camera that was used by most, if not all, of the photographers in that show.
And Banos can find no Vivian Maier pictures for 1 year after the exhibition. None with the box camera and none with the Rolleiflex.
You really have to know your stuff to take pictures with this camera.
Huge steep learning curve between this camera from that camera. So maybe that's why 1952 there's no photographs.
By 1953, Vivian Maier is taking photos like these. Pamela Banos says she doesn't know how far she'll take this research. But while most of us marvel at some of Vivian's best images, Banos says she'd like to see the proof sheets, the good and the bad, to follow Vivian's steps, to see her decisions, to understand this remarkable woman, living between countries and in other people's homes.
She's not French, she's not American, she's not a Chicagoan, she's not a New Yorker. She's just her and her camera. And that's what's constant through her whole life.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Jay Shefsky.
If you missed the first two parts of our Vivian Maier series, you can watch them on our website, where you'll also find a slideshow of her photos and information about upcoming exhibitions in Chicago.